Phil Holloway, criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, joining us now. I say the day is young because who knows where this goes next. But I'll get your thoughts first on Hunter Biden in his own words there. Republicans are trying to kill me. What is your reaction to that?
Well, great to be with you as always, Sandra. Listen, these indictments, and of course, let's remember there are two of them, they are very well founded. And as we say in the law, I think his goose is cooked. Hunter Biden is most likely, barring some kind of a presidential pardon, he's most likely going to be convicted eventually and probably do some time in jail. In his own words, like he mentioned in the podcast, he wrote a book about this. He wrote memoirs, and in those memoirs, he detailed, in his own words, a lot of the salacious information that was quoted by Weiss and his team of attorneys in these indictments, Sandra. He goes into detail about all of the things involving the hookers and the drugs and everything else. But here's the thing. He admits that for large periods of time, during the relevant time period that he wasn't paying taxes, he was high, out of his gourd on crack cocaine for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this begs the question, how can someone in that state manage to earn enough legitimate revenue, Sandra, such that they would owe more than $1 million in taxes on it? So all of the things about the lifestyle, the hookers and the women and the drugs, all that is certainly interesting, and that's what people want to talk about. But we've got to focus on the source of this revenue. Where did it come from? Why did it come from wherever it came from? Who knew about it? Who participated? And who benefited? And so apparently Weiss is not interested in asking those questions or investigating that issue. So this is going to be up to the House of Representatives to get to the bottom of it. It's the source of the revenue, not how it was spent.
Which makes this really important. Hunter Biden's attorney, Abby Lowell, Phil, accused prosecutors of caving to Republican political pressure. He also said this earlier about the tax case. Listen to this.
When they're late or when there's a mistake or when there's something to be done, what the IRS and the government does is they ask questions, they ask for backup, they bring civil actions. What they don't do is take a 2-count misdemeanor in June and turn it into a 9-count, 56-page indictment in December. What had happened with his lateness, why he was, as everybody knows, at the bottom of the barrel of his addiction to crack cocaine, which explains a lot of his misconduct, and also addresses whether he was in what they call a scheme as opposed to just being at the, the dullest part of addiction.
So what about that? I mean, is political pressure fueling this case? And is being an addict a defense?
Yeah, well, I mean, being an addict is not really a defense. And if you listen to what his attorney's saying, he's not addressing really the merits of the cases against Hunter Biden, which I submit are very strong. But there's the reference to the earlier case that would have resulted, in this sweetheart plea deal. That plea deal is looking really, really good, I'm sure, now in the rearview mirror. Now that it's gone, now that it was rejected by the judge, it allows all of this other stuff to happen. But let's not forget that a lot of potential crimes prior to 2016 are now barred by the statute of limitations. Weiss apparently missed any opportunity to investigate or even charge any of those types of things. So Congress is not bound by the statute of limitations. I think it's incumbent upon Congress now to go back even further and explore whether or not there was, in fact, any kind of pay for play. In other words, was Hunter Biden trading on his father's name, and did his father benefit from it? Did his father know about it or even participate? These are the fundamental questions that are absolutely critical to be resolved, and the nation needs to know these things. Yeah. And so if Weiss is not going to do it, the House of Representatives apparently has to.
Really interesting perspective and analysis on all of that. Phil Holloway, thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.